Welcome, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. We'll start with a roll call. Assistant Mayor Kelly.
Here.
Councilor Tabor.
Here.
Councilor Lombardi.
Here.
I am Councilor Cook, and I am here. We have several members of staff joining us today. You will see that they're listed on the agenda. So in case anyone has questions about who was in attendance, in addition to our Deputy City Manager and our legal counsel. We'll start with approval of the minutes from the August 11th, 2025 Governance Committee meeting. Did everyone have a chance to look at the minutes?
Yes.
Can I get a motion to approve?
Second.
And is there any discussion? For those at home, the minutes are in the packet. You can see those online. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Right. The minutes are approved. We are continuing our discussion today of the draft encumbrance order. Attorney Freeney has worked very hard to make some changes for us. I'm going to share those on my screen so everyone at home can see them. And this first section isn't changed, but we go directly to authority, where there's some language for everyone to review. And I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Freeney.
Thank you. In looking at the policies that we are eliminating, I discovered some of this type of language in some of the existing policies that we had, and I thought it was a good idea to expand on really, why we might deny a particular encumbrance permit. This language lived elsewhere, and so I basically, cut and paste and inserted it here. The other change in that section was based on our discussion from the last meeting, and I think two important points were made by the committee. The first was, this notification of abutters has been discussed. Just like outdoor dining baked in our ordinance, we put that on the applicant. So the applicant has to notify, the abutter, and the applicant also has to make sure and swears that they are complying with the New Hampshire Liquor Commission rules and regs. It's not something that we separately approve and chase and upload, but they are saying they are doing what they're supposed to do. So I believe that similarly, when we have these types of requests in our encumbrance permits, we'll be able to add some of, a step or two in the application itself, so that they are swearing that they're going to do that. And then the other issue is we talked about not just the downtown. Right, we talked about everywhere in the city, so that's why we said property located within the city. We just re-emphasized that it's obvious, but and I think this team over here, we've discussed, our staff, how hard that might be to enforce or not, but that's something we can get to as we move forward through this ordinance, and then potentially another ordinance that the city attorney is working very hard on enforcement and ticketing. But we felt that we would add that here just to as we are working through these things. And then two corrections from what we discussed last meeting. One was just a little more clarifying language on the flags and the A-frame signs, because the committee rightly referenced the American flag. So we wanted to distinguish between open signs and American flags. Again, just to make sure we're capturing things as we move through these edits. For the committee's consideration, I did leave the language one or the other. I don't know that the committee landed on that decision, but for draft purposes, I said in this edit, one open sign or one A-frame sign. That's a policy decision that the council can make, or you can recommend if you think both is fine. But we can either revisit that or discuss this now. Might be something to just look at holistically when we're at the end to see where we are. And the one thing I forgot, shame on me, from last meeting, which was right in the do you know publication that Kelly mentioned, were mannequins and clothing racks, right, right there. And so I apologize for excluding that last time. I had forgotten all about them, but they exist. And I did indicate in that, that we do have but one clothing rack and or a mannequin, not both. I forgot all about the mannequins. But that's, again, a policy question because we've allowed it in the past. The question becomes, is that something the council wants to continue to allow? If so, yes. If not, now's the time to open that up for discussion.
I have a question about flags, not the mannequins, and that is, what about the state flag? I mean, I've never seen anybody wanting to do that, but that's yet another.
That's another flag that I think, like the American flag, it's not an open sign, it's not advertising the business. If the committee wants to add that as well as the American flag to this section, then that would be the committee's consideration.
That raises the question of both the American and the state flag.
Right. Now we're talking lots of flags,
Yeah.
in front of the building. And that's more of an aesthetic and also it's again a policy decisions, but I think it would be hard to say no to the state flag. But if the deal is for aesthetic purposes, we just want one flag per premises,
It could be either or.
Yes.
Sorry, what you just said about premises makes me wonder, what about, like, I think about my business where we have two entrances on two different streets. So would we consider that still just one premise? Because, like, we have an entrance on Commercial Alley, and there's other businesses that have this, and an entrance on Market. So
It's a great question.
yeah, so if you're talking, there's obviously a lot of places that have, very narrow, but I think especially with some of the redevelopment in town, we're seeing kind of entrances and buildings being combined in unique ways that we wouldn't see. Or I think of Moxie. They technically have one main entrance, but they do have an entrance on the side also.
Yeah, just like in a zoning ordinance, some properties have two frontages on two different streets. And we had this question come up with A-frame signs just a couple of weeks ago with, the policy says at the time, one per business. But if it's one per entrance or one per, if you have two different entrances on two different streets, that's something that this committee could recommend.
I guess I would include, corner entrances too. I wonder about that, where the new development, Floros' new development has a corner entrance.
Yes, the old Stady lot.
Old State, yeah. And then there's others too. I think the old Custom House too has that.
Yeah.
So if it's either on a corner or has two entrances on two different streets, do we make the exception to say you can have either a flag or an A-frame sign per entrance if they're on different streets?
I thought either flag or A-frame was overly restrictive because I think they have different purposes. The flag, usually is something permanent. It either says open or something like that, and the A-frame is today's specials or quote of the day or something.
So both per?
So I was thinking, maximum one of each.
On a beach.
Yeah, I would agree with John. And I'm in the real world experience too of much like John says, our A-frames rotate depending on what is going on. But I mean, we don't have an open sign, but I think in walking downtown this morning, I think Von Sol has an A-frame and an open sign, and so I think it is restrictive if we ask them to take away one or the other. So I do think one of each to me feels like the real life of what is actually going on too.
I did some reconnaissance on this week. See how many people had a flag and an A-frame, or a flag versus an A-frame, and because I was concerned about it getting too messy, there being too much encumbrance downtown. And what I saw was, because we haven't been enforcing any rules around flags, is there are a lot of places that have both, but then there are a lot of places that have nothing, and they're allowed to do it now. So I don't think that we're going to see some surge in A-frames and flags by allowing both, because I think they're already doing it, the ones who are going to. So I don't really have a problem with allowing both at this point, having done some looking around. And they do serve different purposes. I do have a question around A-frames though, because I did see several A-frames that weren't directly in front of the business that they're advertising.
Mhm.
And part of the reasoning is because the business is located in a difficult spot, that's, people don't see it, right? So they'll put their A-frame down the street a little bit where it's obvious, with a little arrow, so that people can see where their business is located. And so, I kind of had some questions about that. If the abutter doesn't mind, it's in front of their property and the abutter doesn't mind, I don't know that I have a problem with that. That's the thing. But if there's a complaint from the abutter, obviously they'd have to move it. But there are some spots downtown that it just isn't obvious that there's a business.
Yeah.
Immediately right there. Yeah.
I mean, you can Lad Street, even Commercial Alley, some of the businesses, when you're, the retail ones that are deeper in, on the back side of, some of the, like, Shave Street and things like that. I agree with you. And those are just the downtown ones. Again, as we talk about the expansion outside of downtown, there are some places when you drive down, you just think, oh, that's just an office park, but there is some type of retailer or some type of, that puts an A-frame out.
Exactly.
So does it sound like it's a couple of edits then? Add the state flag, both A-frame and open flag are permitted, one of each. And special conditions with a butter permission allowing an A-frame not in front of the brick and mortar premises.
Yes.
Street.
I guess I mean, I wondered about the state flag, and I don't know if it's ever come up. And so,
No, but I think you're right that if we're editing it and it falls in line with the ideal of the American flag, then I think that makes sense to add it in versus.
yeah.
I mean, I hate to even raise this subject, but when the post office was downtown, a flagpole with the US flag and the state of New Hampshire flag, no one was gonna say you can't fly both. This is one of those things, so that I would anticipate if there were ever a state-related office, which you just never know, downtown, maybe we end up with a tourism office one day again. They might wanna fly the state flag.
God forbid a post office.
A miracle.
What I don't think has been quite fully fleshed out, and we can try to do that now or save it for later, is the corner entrance. Whether you want to permit two streets, or if there are two entrances, or B, a corner entrance, then one of each is allowed on each street.
To me, it makes sense if they're both use point entries, right? And I know they're limited, and I just think of my own, right? We have two very dominant entrances, and they're both used. Especially one of them is our ADA entrance, and so we want to make sure you can flag that for people. And so to me, it makes sense. It would be an interesting case study of how many applicants we do get if we see that there are more than. But to me, it makes sense that if those are two active, then you should be able to. Again, making sure that you're not impeding, as we know, the flow of pedestrian traffic.
Yeah,
I guess on corner entrances, they could just put the flag on the corner,
Yeah,
and because it's a single entrance.
I'm thinking about the new Deer Street project will have passageways through
Mhm.
buildings still, if I'm right.
Oh, I'm not up on that, I must confess.
I saw a plan at some point, and there will be a bike path on one side and sidewalk on the other, and if a business is located on the street side, they might want an A-frame on the back side of the building, so people coming that way will know that their business is located on the other side. You know, that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about is how do you alert people who are coming, you know, an opposite direction that you're in that building if they're looking for you.
Right. And the Worth lot.
Yes.
So would directional A-frames be different from
I think so.
advertisement?
Yeah, I think so too.
Wayfinding
Do
A-frames.
you wanna make that distinction?
That might be the right distinction to make.
I know there are some, I'm thinking about that new retail store that's right between TJ's and Moxie at Tito. That they have just like a cute little little wayfinding sign. It's like a metal little wayfinding sign because they're kind of, looks more like a residential unit.
It's important.
So directional A-frame wayfinding type signs are not required to be in front of the premises. Do you still want a butter permission?
I think they'd have to have a better permission. No one wants something, yeah. The last thing that you want is if you're a restaurant
Yeah,
and
so
the
that's-
neighbor's a restaurant and they put their wayfinding sign in front of your restaurant.
Right, that's the problem. That's why the policy was as narrow as it was, because there have been issues, you hit it, you know, that's competing business and
Right.
having their A-frame sign in front of.
Well,
Right, better sandwiches down the road. I mean, that's, we kind of want to avoid that.
and that's where I feel like what the comments just came out of John and Susan, which is permission, like, is there is it permission or acknowledgement?
Notice.
Or
Yeah, is it
notice.
notice or
Yeah.
permission?
Because technically none of us owned that, 100 feet directly in front of our business. So this is where I do worry that, if we say permission and someone says, no, I don't want anyone to have any signs on the street, including myself. So I guess I would defer to legal opinion and staff opinion on that.
I think the idea was if you give a butter notice for any of these encumbrance requests, that gives the abutter an opportunity to submit something to the city manager to
Yeah.
voice their concerns, but it's still the city manager who has the authority to grant or permission. So I'm not sure we want to give abutters any authority to veto in a single voice.
Yeah, I think there are challenges around that.
So a butter notice only for the directional A-frame signs, but a butter permission if you're gonna locate it in front of someone else's premises. I mean, if you have the ability to put it in front of yours, but you want to put it in front of someone else's, is that different, or is that?
I think that's fair to have that be a permission as opposed to a.
When you say a butter, would you just be saying other businesses, or would you be or would you be saying that the 30 condos above the building?
The commercial uses, I think we'd have to narrow it to that, thanks, Mike.
That's a really important distinction, thank you, because that has been a challenge in the past.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm thinking about outdoor dining and how
Yes.
some individuals don't want anyone, who live downtown don't want anyone outside.
Right.
They're afraid of noise. So,
Is that narrowed? So is it still just notice for commercial only? And only notice if it is directional for an A-frame, and approval and notice from the abutter if it's in front of their brick and mortar.
That's the way I would see it. I mean, pedestrians walking around past storefronts, and if he's seeing an A-frame for the storefront he just passed, it seems like the new storefront would the ability to say yes or no on that. But maybe I'm a minority.
I think that that's not a bad thing, because you just never know what kind of relationships people have with their next door businesses, and you don't want to end up in a situation where there's competing signs from the business, the immediate business and the neighboring business. So I think it's probably a good thing to have permission for signs that actually advertise what's inside versus directional signs.
Just one comment if I could. You may want to not put permission because you could have certain tenants or landowners that don't like other folks and do it vindictively and just say, yeah, it doesn't impact him at all, but that person would potentially reach out and do that, and I've seen that happen. So perhaps you could bake it into the review process by staff to make sure the staff is cognizant of it impacting, and maybe staff could work to avoid that type of conflict and give you a little bit more flexibility and less potential for conflict.
Thank you.
So is there a specification in the process for the exact location of these A-frame signs? Like in the application
Yes,
for the placement?
yeah, you have to have a
Diagram.
a diagram.
Can I ask, are we counting the one and only as what's on your property, or are we counting it as you only are allowed to have one? Because what if they have one in front of their property and now one down the street, 3 doors down to get better wayfinding or view? Are they allowed that? Or is it just one and done?
I think one for advertising purposes, but an additional sign for wayfinding if necessary.
Yeah, and I guess that would have to be within the discretion of the city manager.
I think that you have to have that staff review. I think that's the right way to go. Because you also don't want a business saying, well, we have our advertising and then we're gonna put wayfinding signs in every corner.
Right.
But, so I do think that there has to be city discretion around this. So
You might want some language that gives the city manager guidance on that. It's not your intention to allow 4 different wayfinding signs for any given business. And it would be in some type of unique circumstances or some established need based.
right, so I if you think about, there's a barber shop that sits on Court Street. Well, if you're coming down State, you're not gonna see around that corner, and there's not another business there. So they might want a sign on the corner so that people from State Street and Fleet can see that they're around that corner, right? That's the kind of thing I'm thinking of when I'm talking about wayfinding. Not I'm gonna put I'm in Market Square and I'm gonna put a sign in every corner, come to my business.
Well, that makes sense. I'm just thinking of what kind of clear, articulated criteria we can add to the ordinance, so we don't get people complaining that they have some rights that it wasn't intended to give them, right?
I don't know if it's still there, but I remember at Strawberry Bank, museum had signs on Middle Street, on Woodbury Ave, do they still have that?
I don't know. I'm so unobservant.
I don't believe-
I am not the person but I
they-
do remember
they-
those.
They don't really have A-frames. They're they're built into the city's wayfinding system.
Okay.
So they're
Yeah.
on signage with some of the other historical homes.
Yeah,
You used to have white signs, small white signs,
Yeah.
all over the place.
with a little arrow, yeah.
But this is a space that we actually might need more signage for, because people are always looking for it
Yeah.
when they're coming down Marcy Street. And they're not really sure where to turn.
Mhm.
So there are examples where, some additional signage wouldn't hurt.
So maybe I'll just bring back new language on wayfinding signs and kind of capture some of this for our next meeting. And presumably the location and the discussion with the city manager and maybe make that a does it have to be an A-frame, or are we could potentially discuss a different type of wayfinding sign? I don't know.
Right, it could be a sign like the signs that are used at the hotels at Court Walk for ballet that are not A-frames. They're more like a permanent sign. They're not affixed,
They're on a
movable.
post.
But they're on a metal
Yeah.
post that's movable. So there's that. You think about the valet signs, those are not A-frames. So that's always a possibility.
I
As
also
in,
worry about those signs making permanent holes in our sidewalk and just
Yeah.
things that we'll have to fix over time.
And then how long are they out? As I look over at
And
The
we need to
director
get the
writes
sidewalk
on,
track
plowing.
out.
Yeah, they'd have to be taken down at the end of,
Yeah.
the seasons. But, you could just do a ballasted, post on a weight. We use them for like
I think
weebles.
that's what
We had similar ones we had when we did we did like a temporary 15-minute parking for takeout for COVID when nobody was
Yeah.
allowed to have
Right.
people inside.
right, yeah.
So we bought rubber base with a plastic pole. I think something like that, like Fleet Street, for instance, where if you put an A-frame out, it'd be very difficult to
Yeah.
keep that minimum, I think it's 36 inches for
Yeah, can't get
ADA
around it.
compliance,
Yeah.
just because that sidewalk's so small. But we should probably have something in there saying that, they still have to make sure that
36 inches
Mhm.
to get a wheelchair pass.
Probably still have those old rubber bases, right? Probably out in the Sherburne School.
we have we have a bunch.
So I guess it would be feasible for it not to be A-frame, but
Okay,
for wayfinding.
we'll be finding. I can collect the conversation and put maybe come back with a different section on the wayfinding if that works.
We discussed mannequins and clothing racks quickly. Anyone has any comments on mannequins and clothing racks?
Halloween. Mannequins come out.
They do.
Yeah, I guess, I guess for me, I feel like mannequins are very small, that this wordage could be changed to like a mannequin can abut a rack, right? Cause I think it is kind of nice, I think about, what is it? 20 and below, or, that they
Yeah.
usually have a rack and they have essentially a mannequin head or mannequin body torso directly abutting the end of of the rack. So what I want to make sure that we're not doing is taking away some of the things that people have always done that have not really been issues. So that is my one concern where it says or. I think that a mannequin, a partial body mannequin that abuts the end of it doesn't really make much of a physical difference. But I think it's good to enshrine that they can do that.
And the only thing I'm flagging, because we're gonna talk next time, I think, about vending from parking spaces, and I think you're gonna touch on that, Ben, a little bit on sort of the kind of requests that we get at the end of this meeting. But a clothing rack is stuff for sale, so that's actually vending.
Yeah.
As opposed to a sign or a mannequin. So just as I'm looking through these things and trying to categorize them, that kind of occurred to me, like, oh,
Yeah.
they're actually selling the product on the sidewalk as opposed to a sign or a mannequin, which is to draw attention to the business so you can come in, but we've always allowed them.
So it's considered vending even though they have to bring the merchandise inside to pay?
Well, the product is there.
There, okay.
You know what I mean? So they're not paying for it on the sidewalk, but they're displaying
Displaying
it. And the only reason that it dawns on me of all these old ordinances, seriously, that we have about laying stuff on sidewalks and these
Yeah.
old-fashioned language about
selling.
weird, whatever people sold in the
Wooden
olden
wagon
days. Yeah,
bus.
strange. And that's the only reason why, so.
I'd love a wooden wagon bus.
Yeah.
We're back. Okay.
I think that this is important to allow as much as even though it's technically vending or selling on the sidewalk, because we have allowed it in the past. And I also think that a lot of our retailers are concerned about benefits that, say, the dining and restaurants receive, and they feel like they don't receive this. I don't know that they all know that they're allowed to have clothing racks or mannequins on the sidewalk, and then we allow that encumbrance. I think it's important to let them know that, you know, we really want to support their retail business and allow them this opportunity. The question I have is, we say mannequin and clothing racks, and that discriminates against some businesses who don't sell clothing. So what about all the businesses that don't sell clothing, but sell housewares, or are they allowed to have a table that would be no wider than a clothing rack?
That would be a policy decision by city council, but you're opening a big door.
Yeah.
You're opening a really big door about, you know, of vending on the sidewalks, which we get questions all the time. I sell Omaha steaks and I wanna come to town and I wanna encumber 4 parking spaces and I'm gonna sell, or I'm gonna, I feel like, you know, you have to make sure there aren't unintended consequences and unintended impacts. If the goal is to preserve what we've done, then this is that. If the goal is to expand, that's a different, I think that's a completely different conversation.
Now, other towns have different arrangements for this. For example, Exeter does not allows mannequins and clothing racks frequently, but then has sidewalk sales where everyone's allowed to have, has a sidewalk sale weekend. And that way everyone is given an opportunity. It's just not all the time.
That's a good
It's a good option.
idea,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whether that sidewalk sale might capture some of the downtown businesses, and the chamber might have some input on that as far as proposing that whatever it's monthly or, you know, might be something that could be permitted.
It might be easy to test run that on specific days like Market Square Day or Children's Fest Day or something like that would be an easy add-on, right?
I will say Market Square Day is hard because I speak for, it is a really hard day for local vendors because you essentially have to now buy the space in front of we stopped doing it because we're having to spend an extra $400 to pay the booth fee to just have the space in front of our shop. So I know a lot of local shops actually just don't open that day or open and hope people stroll in. But I do think it might be something outside of this committee to maybe talk whether through EDC or through the chamber and I know the EDC and Sean have been working on the local love. So maybe that's just another way to, pop something in with that. But I think it's a good idea to try to figure out if there's a day or days that are in our calendar organically that it kind of fits in. Yeah.
But it's sad to think that our regular downtown businesses are not even open,
For Market Square Day.
which is sad.
It's a really,
It's hard.
Yeah.
For business.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think, Market Square Day is a day everyone still enjoys, much like Apple Harvest Day, much like the sidewalk sale in Exeter. It's just a day that is not really, I think, anymore because it's gotten so big.
Yeah.
And this is I think Pro Portsmouth does an amazing job offering discounts for booths and things like that. But I think, a lot of local businesses, and if you talk to them, I feel like they all share it pretty rough. It's not always our greatest day. It's a great day for a guy from Ipswich, Massachusetts, who comes up with this with his hand-pressed lemonade machine, but not always a great day for everyone else.
I think that the chamber's shop around town thing could lend itself to being a time for that. And that's. I think they did that in the evening after Market Square Day. Was it or they've done it on
After the Christmas break.
Art Fridays.
Yeah.
Things like that. I think.
Local love is a nice suggestion because it's a Thursday night, so it's not the height of busy downtown
Restaurant.
and sidewalk use. So the encumbrance wouldn't be so much a challenge, and it would promote local love.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that maybe we should add a provision for sidewalk sales that are approved by, you know, or a discussion around that with the EDC and ways that it's allowed to like we're allowed to have a sidewalk sale. I don't know.
So if we want to refer it for me and ordinance to bring up to EDC next month, and then start that conversation with the chamber and EDC, obviously in everyone, but maybe refer it to them to see if it's something that because now with the CRM system that Sean has developed with a lot of our local businesses and kind of a Rolodex, and with the chamber, might be a good way to say, hey, the city would like to support an initiative like this.
Yeah,
Why don't you guys take the ball?
and, you know, something could be combined with the efforts of resident parking in the downtown. Like if, I don't know, if you can do, you know, pick out a day and change all that stuff for the day for parking. But that's,
Just like in December, you mean, when free parking is
Yeah.
given or something like that?
An interesting
I'm
idea.
asking our parking guy.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the need to do that, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I think people are coming down and parking's not preventing people from coming down.
Yeah.
So I think the difficulty to execute that would, you know,
Not
It's just been
matter.
efforts
and it would
to,
complicate things in terms of, you know, being able to make that happen. So when you say resident, you're just saying free parking for residents downtown
yeah,
for that day?
for that, or for that event.
So how do you differentiate a resident, you know, how do you
License.
document whether somebody's a resident or not?
License plate.
I just moved into town, I haven't registered my car yet.
Yeah.
You gotta
You know,
register
I mean,
your
there's
car.
I'm channeling Ben, but.
Good job.
I know
You
this
notice
guy
I
was
didn't say
keeping
anything?
quiet on
He's
that.
very calm.
I think if you start down that road, it's a much bigger, different conversation
Yeah.
than, you know, street fair type thing.
Yeah, I don't think parking incentives are necessary to draw people to this event. I don't think parking is a deterrent, other than it's difficult to find space anyway, which during an event, everybody knows will be exacerbated. So
Yeah.
it's just like we don't offer discounts for events any longer in either of the garages. There's no need, because the onus to do that is to try and draw people to the garage for the event. Now okay, enough. I'm the only parking director in the world who doesn't want more cars.
It's a good thing that people want to be there, so. So I guess this is something we could explore. I just want to make sure that the ordinance changes we're working on don't exclude that. And I don't think they do if it's an event.
Well,
So,
we can
Because then it
we
runs
can
off the
decide what
manager's
we wanna
office.
do with our property without an ordinance. So the
Yes.
city, you know, also we're trying to put as a permit, special event permit. So I think hearing what EDC might have to say about it and having their ideas and then bringing that back, I'm not sure we need to, I mean, it's one of those things where if you bake it into the ordinance, it's a shall, you know, we can say may. But then there are certain seasons and situations where we might want flexibility. So I'd be curious as to what EDC would report back. When is the,
That's not till next month. So what I can do, when is I think it's
First Friday, January.
of October. I'm at a Rotary golf tournament. But what I can also do is email Ben at the chamber and see if there's start the conversation there, and then it naturally matriculates into the EDC.
sounds great.
I will email Ben.
If there are no other comments on mannequins and clothing racks, we can move on to short-term encumbrance permits.
Did we decide if the or is staying?
I think you wanted both, it sounded like, both.
Okay, great.
Yep,
Sorry, I missed that.
great.
Switching over about parking.
This is where we have a lot more language here, so.
Right. So we have our team, we've Peter Rice, Jennifer Wentworth, Ben Fletcher, and Mike Saad, who all helped and commented on, you know, the short and long-term encumbrance permits, and work day to day, every day on a lot of these issues. And I was explaining to the deputy city manager, Carl Repertsman, it's like the tip of an iceberg, This little encumbrance permit is, is a very simple thing, and oftentimes the council doesn't see it, but in reality, you're seeing that, all of everything underneath the surface of the water for the iceberg. There's a lot more than one would think that goes into some of these seemingly simple permits. And so these are the people that deal with that. And I don't know if you just want to talk generally about.
So it's important to bear in mind, we're trying to balance expediting and getting these jobs done as quickly as possible because it minimizes the impacts to businesses and residents with the regular, making sure we're protecting our, rights and needs and safety and all those other things. So we often work closely with contractors in town to try to facilitate and try to get more out of their work than just their project. Oftentimes we get sidewalk improvements, we get curbing improvements, we get other types of things. So it's a fine balance for the department. Certain groups of the department, the parking group, can actually do enforcement fairly well. Our construction group can do soft enforcement, cajoling, trying to point him in the right direction, saying, hey, if you continue to do this wrong, you're going to, somebody else is going to come down and you're going to have a lot worse time. So we have kind of the good cop, bad cop discussions quite often on how to keep the contractors moving forward, keep them complying, and having this flexibility where oftentimes they say, it's 30 days, well, it ends up being 35, 40 days. So having that ability to do a simple extension will help us keep the project going quickly instead of slowing them down and stopping them to say, okay, you need to go back for a license, which becomes, a delay in sense. But if they're just playing us and it's going time and time again, we can then, go to the manager who will have a little bit more force for them. And then obviously if they continue it too long, it would be required to go to a license. So by the time it got to the manager, I would think she would be queuing it up for a license, because if you're going more than 60 days on an encumbrance, that unless we see them buttoning up on day 61, I don't see it as being something that the manager would say, yeah, let's not start the license process, and then you have 30 days to get it in front of council and have that discussion. But usually contractors are pretty good. They for the most part, they want the same thing, get out of there as quickly as possible. They don't want to get people upset. So it gives us this, I think the way it's written now gives us a lot of flexibility. And oftentimes things adjust during construction. So we have conversations with the folks and say, well, you need to change what you're doing.
Yeah, I think staff manages it really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm always impressed with how well you manage these projects. I know people complain, well, now end of Congress Street is going to be under construction, and Fleet Street, what are we going to do? But
yeah,
Not in wooden homes.
it has to get done.
it has to get done. And I'm just, frankly, to your credit, I'm impressed with the job.
Well, it's the team, obviously,
Yeah.
and the changes that have occurred over the last year or so, where we're starting to do weekly meetings with a lot of these big projects downtown, helps a lot because we coordinate the delivery of their materials and the construction activities, and it keeps people aware, and potential pitfalls that could be coming up that we can avoid. Major.
It's a lot to manage, and our town has been in a major construction, revitalization, however you want to word it, boom for the last 10 years and the last, 3-4 years post-COVID. And, at least construction-wise, the hope is that we're kind of, the lots that have been redeveloped, and now it's the city's time to really take in some of the infrastructure jobs that you guys have in the pipeline. And I think, again, managing it is good. And so to have your opinion on this verbiage and how it works in actuality, to me I take your word.
And just giving us a little bit more power in understanding that we do deal with these contractors every single day. And we know who they are, we know what they're doing, we know if they are being straight with us, you know, it does give us a little bit more leeway. And I ran the numbers this morning. We're actually a little low on encumbrance permits so far this year, but we're at 60 since January 1st right now. We used to have a lag in the winter time. We don't have a lag anymore. Now it's construction fully year round now.
One of the things that I'd asked about this was that I have received some complaints about people putting dumpsters on the street for 30 days, removing them,
Yeah,
and bringing them back 5 days later or 10 days later for another 30 days. And that, you know, without, so that it doesn't go to the city council, because right now those go to the city council. One of the things that I would like to see is just notice to the council anything over 30 days in the downtown overlay district specifically, because that space is tight. And I'm not saying council approval, I'm saying notice, so that people can be aware that somebody's asked for more than 30 days, because that's when we start getting the questions. I'm thinking specifically about this year, the North Church project it did come before the council, and we gave them the first extension, and then it was obvious that they were parking trucks and using it for their parking instead of just for laydown and construction site. And so then, you know, I was able to question that at the council, and then you guys did a great job of getting them to push the fence back and to put parking there. Because we were going into the summer months. So that's the ability for the council to at least to be aware and to be able to raise any issues that abutters have, because a lot of times the abutters contact us first, not you guys. And so I think that's an important piece. You know, instead of continuing the process of, right now the council has to approve all of these. And I think notice is valuable, just notice is valuable.
So would you add that to number 2 where it says maybe extended, this is 30 days after council has been notified or something, you know, it's in addition, you know, council being put on notice or something like that.
Council notified at the next available meeting. I mean, so it's not, I don't want to delay the projects. I think that's critical. I think just the council should be notified that we're in a second 30-day period, or, you know, this is anticipated to be, you know, 60 days. Because we're giving a lot of leeway up to 90 days essentially here. And so I can think of projects in midsummer that somebody's encumbering. Say somebody decides to put a dumpster in front of your business on the street because they own a property that they're emptying and they don't have a spot right in front of their property. You're gonna wanna know midsummer if there's a dumpster parked in front of your building or right in front of your business for 90 days. I mean, I can see that being a real concern for a business owner.
And we added a butter notification on this as well, right? So at least they would know that a 30-day permit has been started. We may not know at that point if they need longer than that.
Okay.
Because it would be a case by case past the 30-day. Because the standard is still 30. We're still maintaining that is the standard time you should be encumbering space.
I know we've issued dumpster permits that require them to take the dumpster away on the weekends, so Friday afternoon it's cleared away, and that way the weekend's cleared, and they have to, you know, so it's you know, it's difficult. I can think of, you know, if you have apartments that need to be renovated and you have, you know, construction debris, demolition debris that has, you know, you gotta, I mean, you can, there are, you know, you could use dumpster or dump trucks to shoot it directly to. So
This is just one of those, just making sure that everybody's aware so that we can make accommodations some way for those businesses that may feel impacted on the first floor, like allowing them to put their A-frame, you know, in a different, more directional signage, you know, or that kind of thing, so that people don't lose track of, you know, these businesses are open. I think that's really, it's more just a communication tool, I think. So everybody's informed.
What's the enforcement power though? Like,
That's a separate conversation, yeah.
I mean,
so
what do you do right now? for your enforcement, if any. We have Jason that will
We
tell
have
us.
Jason.
Yeah, and Mike, sees if they're not,
I mean,
things are.
95% of the time, you just go down and have a conversation, explain the rules, and,
Yep.
and, I mean, but, occasionally there is a need to.
What if the
I
contractor
guess.
goes bust?
We can usually resolve it, but when we can't, then we call Jason. That's a little bit more edge to the message.
And he can usually resolve it too, which is great.
Oh, sure.
But, if it ever got to the point where we actually needed to do an enforcement, so I am currently working on a ticketing system for various departments to use for code enforcement, that they can use and they wouldn't have to rely strictly on Jason to use it, whereby they could issue a summons or a ticket that says, hey, you're in violation, here's $50 fine for your first offense, please pay this, or tell us if you want to go to court about it. And hopefully that will help bring them into compliance. That would be the goal, not so much getting the $50 for the fine. But if it can't be resolved with the staff conversations, then hopefully the system will help DPW as well as inspections and planning and all of that, and health, et cetera. Everybody who's out there monitoring licenses and permits.
One suggestion could be, you could reference stipulations that may be issued associated with the encumbrance permit, such as additional signage, but not bake it into the ordinance as a prescriptive, but more flexibility and just referring to that DPW has the ability to add different, additional stipulations, whether it's wayfinding or whether it's detour signs or something like that.
And we would also have oversight about whether we want to allow an extension or not. Like if this contractor for some reason we know is going outside of our rules and regulations, we can say no. You do not have an extension past that 30 days or 60 days.
If they've got a huge excavation and this is not a 30-day encumbrance, so we could say.
The team flag for me, it was a shall. They're like, no, it's a may. It's a may. And then they also flagged the added language for review new, the extension may require new conditions and fees. So that way they have that discretion, they have the knowledge, and they can, make those decisions based on the facts as presented. And then I think you had a.
Yeah, so your concern about notice to the city council. So in page 2, I think, in the section 102 at the end, the last paragraph in black, the last sentence, the city manager shall provide regular updates to the city council regarding the issuance of encumbrance permits and licenses under this chapter. So if you want to bake in something more specific than regular updates, if you want like every 30 days or every council meeting or.
I would love to see, we could reference this language, but I'd love to see something that says, city manager shall notice the council of permits that have been extended beyond 30 days in the downtown overlay district per, section 102. Something like that. Just notice, not
Right,
ask for
exactly,
permission,
just an
just
informational item.
notice. Yes.
And I think we wanted it right? Not just.
Question for Jennifer, is that easy to list
I
or
know,
no?
trying to think of
You're-
I'm going in the background of
From an
open
administrative
gov right now. No, I think we just had a kind of quasi extension recently that was requested, and what we had to do was kind of revamp the permit workflow now to add on these extra steps to allow for an extension period. So Jane, your question I just think is super valid, but I think if we just add in a notification to the CM's office that this, once an extension happens and it's been approved, we've
like
agreed
that.
and we
Yeah.
got the fee, kick
And it's
a
right in the
notification there.
workflow.
It's all in the workflow.
Okay, great.
And we would need to coordinate with the CM's office on how they then execute that information, but at least we
It'd
have
be
a
a running
mechanism
list.
to
We need to
move
get
it
captured
over.
for the
Great.
agenda.
Does that make sense
The
to you?
council agenda, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to create more work, but at the same time, I do think it's important, so if we get complaints and concerns, people are very sensitive about certain areas of town.
No.
I'm thinking that the next non-municipal project, big project is going to be Floros.
Yeah, or McNabb's.
Well, I mean, but I'm thinking of downtown, right in the middle of downtown.
Yeah. The 2 Congress Street is gonna be harder than, because you're gonna be disrupting Glad Street and High Street.
Yeah,
So, and there's deliveries and there's all sorts of
That's
stuff that
right,
goes through
yeah.
there.
Just lay down.
It's a big project. Okay, yes.
Do we also want to build into OpenGov the extension over 60, less than 90 at the city manager's office, so that it's done in OpenGov as well?
Yeah, we'll have to think about how
Process and
to
workflow that gets
implement their section into that, but we can
I
we
would-
could definitely look into it.
I would argue no.
Really?
I would argue that you're better off either having a separate workflow, not a continuation of the same, just to make it really clear that this is a big deal.
Even just the CM approval between the 60 and 90 day as an extension level?
I mean, that's what I'm thinking, because if you go to, if you're in a 60 to 90, somebody was misled along the way.
That makes sense.
Yeah, started at 30 and now you're at 90.
Yeah.
And so now the way the workflow works is that if we know they're gonna go into the license section, it kind of only opens when it's necessary. So it wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be that challenging to do the exact same thing. Like, it's not there unless it's needed.
Right.
And then that new section just opens up and it brings in the whole other workflow section.
My thought is that you want to make it a little painful.
I'm thinking about just making sure it's all recorded in the same place,
Oh, yeah.
so we can.
The benefit of that is that
everything
everything links to the address at that point. So the location now has all of the history of everything that's ever happened to it, which is really why we need this.
Right, but findability and, yeah, and organizational, you wanna link it to the, yeah.
Not doing it in some other process that's not linked to this whole event.
Right, it's all the same record in the database. Same address.
I'm thinking about that poor family whose bathroom remodel got extended how many times?
One on South, yeah.
It happens. I'll tell you,
South
even
School
in
Street,
spring,
I remember that.
it rained so many weeks in a row that we just had people who
Spring.
said, I can't do that work because it's been raining nonstop. So yeah, there's just a lot of opportunity for this flux.
I have one more question about this, because this doesn't really capture the strange violation that a neighbor pointed out to me, where someone on Gate Street was doing construction, and they didn't have a dumpster, they had a trailer, construction trailer that they put sides up so it acted as their construction haul away, but then they just left it there for a year.
Yeah, anything over
And they
72 hours?
Moved it,
72 hours.
they would like
72 hours, it's an encumbrance.
hook it up and move it,
Just
20
like
feet.
every
Yeah.
3 days they move
Yeah,
it.
and move it, because it was on a trailer. That way they didn't have to get permission for
We're very familiar and we don't have the time and the place to discuss this, but yes.
yeah, so this is my, just making sure, I don't know how to make sure something like that is captured. So that when we get to, how do we issue and do enforcement of something, I wanna make sure that something like that is captured in our ordinance so that the staff can do enforcement if there's a problem like that.
It's a tough one. Because, so whoever's visiting and they've got a little trailer and they're here for the summer and they, move it back and forth, they fall into that, encumbrance thing. So, I mean, it's technically they're following the rules, they're every 72 hours they move. So,
However, I remember our old parking ordinance, which was awfully hard to enforce, but did address moving. Then, I forget what it was
500 feet.
related to.
that was with a metered space though.
That was metered spaces, and it was 500 feet, and that was before we did stay and pay, because that's what they would do. They do the dance. They just jump
Yeah,
back and
that
forth.
dance, and so
You
we
could- I
did
mean,
have
you
language
could
in
use
there
that similar language with
saying,
500 feet.
right,
Yeah,
if
we can
you
do that.
moved a parking space within so many feet, that didn't count,
It was,
right?
yeah, it was 500.
Right.
So we could resurrect that language for this purpose.
But we have to be careful too, because the
Right.
same residents are gonna park on that street every single day. They're gonna move their car. But car's gonna come back, and it's probably gonna come back in relatively similar position,
There's probably a lot of cars that don't move for weeks on end.
Right.
probably,
That's true.
probably. So this is a careful, but, I mean, specifically around,
Construction
Construction.
trailers and
Exactly.
dumpsters.
yeah, commercial, work. You just wanna be careful that somebody's not taking up 3 residential parking spots forever. Yeah.
Maybe word it as non-residents, or, because if they're contractors, they're not gonna be resident at that location.
And the vehicle will not have been registered with the tax office,
Oh, that's true.
Right.
most likely.
Yeah, we've got a construction trailer that's been on a street in our neighborhood. It's got chocks under the wheels and blocks under the tongue, and it's been sitting there for a couple of weeks on the street. And it doesn't particularly bother me, it's not my street, but it bothers somebody, I would think.
Yeah, it becomes difficult, I think, when you're in a tight parking neighborhood, right? So I think of that happening in Islington Creek or in the South End, it becomes very challenging. So I would just want to be mindful of how, making sure you have what you need to enforce what are kind of soft violations. They're not technically a violation, but it's a way to get around the ordinance, those workarounds.
I think Ben's suggestion about it, or whoever suggested that moving, you have to move it with 500 feet. If you're a contractor, you're not gonna wanna, haul debris 500 feet away, and it's all of a sudden it becomes,
It's a deterrent.
they're gonna wanna get the
But
permit.
only if they know about it, that's the tricky spot. If they're doing all of this to avoid, they don't know,
Yeah.
right? They don't know that exists. It's tricky.
So maybe it's the resurrect 500 feet for non-resident commercial. However, whatever language you
Yeah,
think.
we'll
was a-
think on that, and that's also, we can put maybe that in the enforcement penalty section of this when we get there. And talk about that again once we've had a chance to kind of figure out what language and maybe the unintended or intended consequences of whatever we draft to make sure we've,
And how frequently do we have this challenge?
right, and how is that enforced and who monitors it and,
Honestly.
right.
Probably not frequent, but when it does occur in a tight neighborhood, I mean, tight neighborhoods are already where we have the biggest challenges, I think. But when it does occur, then we need to have some kind of mechanism.
Do we limit it to the residential neighborhoods, this application of, you know what I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there.
Usually when it happens, isn't it? Because downtown, we already have a prohibition for parking and commercial zone. They're supposed to have alternate parking arrangements for their
For the
contractors.
contractors, correct?
Or an encumbrance permit.
So, the parking division's really only staffed to do the downtown, but we will go and respond to complaints, and Gate Street was definitely one that we received, more than one complaint a week anyway, I'll put it that way. And that was a challenge to try to address some of that, which we did address some of that. But, if nobody complains, typically we're not actively going into neighborhoods and
People may not realize either that, well, if he's moving it back and forth, he knows, but a lot of folks don't realize they have to have encumbrance permits, even if it's a non-metered space.
Right.
You think they can just hang, yeah.
It's an interesting spot to be in, and I think the parking department handled it well. But my concern is the ordinance doesn't give them the authority to take action when needed, and just making sure that we have the language we need so that we can do that effectively. I always want to err on the side of protecting residents, or, even though, it becomes more of a challenge for me because I live somewhere where there's no, if I have a contractor, I have nowhere to put anything. So So I can understand the challenges of if you're doing construction on your property, how do you manage that, right? I mean, there are some real challenges in tight spaces in this.
So I think we talked about the short and the short terms and those extensions and the licenses all were sort of lumped together. I just added these last two sections because they come before the council and we didn't really have it written down anywhere, you know. So now when we are, construction's happening and we find from a plan that somebody's old retaining wall encroaches into our right-of-way, we just do the licenses that are now being sent to council for, and record those in the registry, and they're on our data now, so we know where these little encroachments are, and there are quite a few tiny little encroachments all over our old city. So that's just memorialized in this section, and then the public utilities, you're seeing, you know, from Jennifer, who's been now tasked with working, getting these before the council, the utility licenses that are also coming before council now, but we didn't really have anything memorialized about that, so we put that in here as well.
Can I just ask, how do we handle some of these licenses for encroachments when the encroachment occurred before the city owned the property?
We really don't go that far back. We're really just dealing with the time now moving forward. And because it is an encroachment, we're not saying no. We're just acknowledging the location and having it recorded so that anybody doing a title search would know there's this, you know, little encroachment here, and we're permitting it via a license. We're not giving them fee title to it. We're just giving, and they're revocable. We say that these are actually revocable as well. However, we're recording them to make sure that it's noticed not just from a title search perspective, but that that our team that, you know, put all our maps together will account for those as we do further construction on that street. So we don't dig up a little pipe, which happened for 18 Congress last month. Well, it happened a while ago. Well, we had no idea that their driveway heating pipe encroached into 18 Congress. I'm sorry, in not Congress. What's next to Congress? The street that
State.
no.
Maplewood, Middle
Fleet
Chapel.
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 Chapel by the bridge there.
Yeah, and we realized when we did work, we found a little pipe, so we memorialized that. Now that, interestingly, was what Paul McEachern did some of the work on that. So we're talking, you know, the work was a while ago. We were able to find it. It was under a different name. It was 16 Congress. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that comes up, and would prevent, you know.
Yeah, and
us digging it
typically
up.
we put property owners on notice that, you know, that wall that they've built in the city right of way may have to be moved, and usually we have language that says, you know, at your expense, or we may damage it and you have to repair it. The practice is, though, we end up, for the most part, always taking care of it and putting it back in good order. So, I mean, there's many instances, you know, all over the city, between stairways and walls and fences and shrubs, and you name it.
I've had good experience with DPW repairing my iron stair rails on the front of my house after the plow has hit us a few times. But the reality is that my stairs and most of the stairs on the front of houses in the South End, and that's why I'm asking this question, encumber city property, but it wasn't city property when these houses were built. So they were there first, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a challenge. That's why I'm asking this question about, you know, we're saying it's revocable, but most of these houses would be inaccessible if you took away their front stairs.
Right.
So I just wanted to know how this was done, because it is a huge number of homes with front staircases that go
And
straight into the street.
And when we find them, we memorialize them. There are many that are not memorialized. I would say percentage of what's memorialized is very, very small compared to what exists. And I think we say the revocability and the cost because, you know, in fact, when there's, you know, a big project that Peter has to manage on that road or that sidewalk or something, then oftentimes those are removed, you know, and when they're put back, they're, you know, we want to memorialize that they're there and that who's responsible for putting it back, as Peter says, 9 times out of 10. If we're causing that work, we do it. But just good to note them as we move from here forward.
So this is, I would say, a touchy subject to handle, just making sure that the city handles these very carefully.
Yeah, I mean,
It's really critical.
it's very hard when you interact with folks because it becomes very personal to them when it's in front of their property or associated with their property. I have a hedge that I always thought was my hedge. It's a city hedge. And, you know, it's like, well, you can't cut that down. And I'm like, well, they can cut that down. I can. My department can take it down if it is needed. And it may well be taken down soon, much to my dismay. But you know, we work very closely with residents on this stuff, and you know, when possible, you know, we try to give back the best, you know, as best we can. But there, you know, it's the intent is to try to prevent people from all of a sudden squatting on the land and building something that's really difficult to move.
Right.
So.
Exactly. And I'm looking at it from a historic preservation perspective, like not wanting to lose original staircases that jut into or right up to a city
We had a
roadway.
case like that in Pleasant Street.
We had one of those licenses and that's how it arose and that's how we started to notice all these things because it went to the HDC and they had to put they were trying to replace with, you know, their broken steps, but HDC opined on the materials. And then when we looked at it, we realized it was encroaching. And that's really what started this, what was like 2 years ago? I forget the name, I forget the address, but.
And then you get ADA compliance when if it's encroaching on the sidewalk width or the pitch of the sidewalk and it can't work, and then you know, all of a sudden it becomes really expensive to rework a set of stairs, or change the inside of, you know, right in the front foyer of a building. But it's you know, it's a historic city and that's what we do. So we try to balance.
Any other questions? Okay. Do you have all the information you need to move forward?
I think so.
I want to thank our guests for being here today and answering our questions. Very, very helpful. We don't have other business, and I don't see anyone here for public comment. As far as our next scheduled meeting, that's usually we handle on announcements. I have September 29th at 11 a.m. You want to make sure that's on everyone's calendar. And I am not available on the 13th of October because it's a holiday, and I think the building will be closed. I would suggest we not move that meeting, that we try instead for a different week. I guess we could try to meet on the questions I have on the 20th. That's the same day as council. In the past, there's been concerns around that. Does anyone have a problem with meeting on the same day as city council?
No, man.
On the 20th of October instead because of the holiday? Okay.
And then we have a meeting on the 27th too?
I don't have it on the schedule currently for the 27th.
Okay,
We
well,
could
then
do
that's
one or
good.
the
Yeah,
other,
yeah.
but not both.
Let's just do the 20th.
Okay, so if we can do the 20th, that's what we will do to avoid the holiday in October. And I think that's it. Can I
Great.
get
Motion to adjourn.
a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.